You know that moment when you realize your quiet little brother has been suffering in silence for weeks, and you're about to become someone's worst nightmare? Well, buckle up, because what happened at Lincoln Middle School that Tuesday afternoon changed everything. 3 boys thought they could destroy my brother's homework and humiliate him in front of the entire cafeteria. They had no idea his big sister held a 3rd-degree black belt and a very short temper when it came to family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Chun, and I've been practicing martial arts since I was 6 years old. At 17, I'm a junior at Lincoln High School, but this story isn't really about me, at least it wasn't supposed to be. It's about my little brother, Danny, and how 3 bullies at his middle school made the biggest mistake of their pathetic lives. Danny is 13, skinny as a rail, and has always been what people politely call academically gifted. What they really mean is that he's a total nerd who would rather spend his lunch break in the library reading about quantum physics than playing basketball with the other kids. He's got this messy black hair that never cooperates, thick-rimmed, glasses that are always sliding down his nose, and the kind of pale complexion that screams, "I spend more time indoors with books than outside with people." Don't get me wrong, I love my brother to pieces. He's brilliant, kind, and funny in his own quiet way. But I also know that middle school can be brutal for kids like Danny. I remember my own experience at Lincoln Middle, though thankfully I had my martial arts training to keep the worst of the predators at bay. Danny, on the other hand, wouldn't hurt a fly if it was personally insulting his mother. Our parents, David and Linda Chun, both work crazy hours. Dad's a software engineer who's always traveling for work, and Mom's a nurse who pulls double shifts. At the hospital, they're amazing parents, but they're not around as much as they'd like to be. That means I've kind of become Danny's unofficial guardian, making sure he gets home safe, helping with homework when he actually needs it, and generally keeping an eye on him. The thing is, Danny had been acting weird for about 3 weeks before everything exploded. He'd always been quiet, but this was different. He started coming home from school looking like someone had kicked his puppy. His grades, which were usually perfect, began slipping. He'd sit at the dinner table pushing food around his plate without eating, claiming he wasn't hungry. Most telling of all, he stopped talking about school entirely. I tried asking him what was wrong, but Danny's always been stubborn. "Nothing's wrong, Jess," he'd say, adjusting his glasses and avoiding eye contact. "Just tired from all the homework." But I could see the dark circles under his eyes, the way he'd flinch when his phone buzzed, and how he'd started taking different routes home from school. The first real sign that something was seriously wrong came on a Monday morning. I was getting ready for school, standing in front of my bedroom mirror putting my long black hair into a high ponytail, when I heard a crash from Danny's room next door. I rushed over and found him on his hands and knees, frantically trying to shove papers back into his backpack. "Danny, what happened?" I asked, kneeling down to help him gather what looked like torn homework assignments. "Nothing," he said quickly, but his voice cracked. "Just dropped my bag." I picked up a piece of paper that had been ripped nearly in half. It was his math homework, and I could see the careful work he'd put into solving each equation. Danny might be a lot of things, but careless with his schoolwork isn't one of them. "Did someone do this to your homework?" I asked, holding up the torn paper. Danny's face went red, and he snatched the paper from my hands. "No, it just got caught in my locker door." "It's fine, I can fix it." But it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. Danny would leave for school with perfectly organized homework and come home with assignments that looked like they'd been through a paper shredder. His textbook started showing up with pages torn out or covered in what looked suspiciously like food stains. One day, his backpack came home soaking wet, and when I asked about it, he mumbled something about spilling his water bottle. "I'm not stupid. I knew someone was messing with my little brother. But Danny's always been independent, and I didn't want to embarrass him by fighting his battles for him. I figured he'd eventually come to me when he was ready to talk about it. That was my first mistake. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Danny and I were eating breakfast while I was eating. He was staring at his cereal like it had personally offended him. Mom had already left for an early shift at the hospital, and Dad was somewhere in Seattle for a week-long conference. No, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. If someone at school is giving you trouble, you can tell me about it. I won't do anything you don't want me to do. Danny looked up at me through his glasses, and for a moment, I thought he was going to finally open up. Instead, he just shook his head and pushed his bowl away. There's nothing to tell, Jess. Can we just drop it? I wanted to push, but something in his voice told me that would only make him shut down more. So I nodded and finished my breakfast. In silence, watching as my brother gathered his things with the kind of careful precision that suggested he was preparing for battle rather than going to school. After Danny left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go very wrong. I have pretty good instincts about these things. Part of martial arts training is learning to read people and situations. My sensei, Master Kim, always says that the best fighters are the ones who can sense trouble before it finds them. And every instinct I had was screaming that my little brother was walking into something he couldn't handle. I was right. That afternoon, I was in my AP chemistry class, half listening to Mrs. Rodriguez explain molecular bonds when my phone buzzed. I glanced down discreetly and saw a text from an unknown number. Your brother just got humiliated in the cafeteria. Thought you should know. My blood went cold. I raised my hand and asked to use the bathroom, then slipped out into the hallway to call the number back. It went straight to voicemail, but I recognized the voice. It was Amy Martinez, a girl from my English class whose younger brother goes to Lincoln Middle. I called her back during lunch break, and what she told me made my hands shake with anger. Jessica, I'm so sorry, Amy said, her voice full of sympathy. My brother Carlos saw the whole thing. These 3 boys cornered Danny in the cafeteria and completely destroyed his homework right in front of everyone. They were laughing and calling him names, and then one of them dumped chocolate milk all over his backpack. Carlos said Danny just sat there and took it, didn't even try to fight back. Who were they? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm considering the rage building in my chest. I don't know their names, but Carlos described them. One's a big kid with red hair and freckles, really tall for his age. Another one's shorter but stocky, kind of looks like a bulldog. And the third one's got bleached blonde hair and always wears this stupid leather jacket like he thinks he's in some 1950s movie. I knew exactly who she was talking about. I'd seen those 3 kids around the neighborhood, and they had trouble written all over them. The redhead was probably Tyler Brooks, whose older brother had been suspended from my school twice for fighting. The stocky one sounded like Marcus Webb, and the blonde was definitely Austin Phillips. All 3 of them had reputations for being problems, and apparently they'd decided my quiet little brother was an easy target. Did any teachers see what happened? I asked. Carlos said there were teachers around, but they either didn't notice or pretended not to. You know how it is. Yeah, I knew exactly how it was. Teachers never seemed to see the subtle bullying, the kind that left no physical marks but destroyed kids from the inside out. They'd respond to a black eye or a bloody nose, but psychological torture? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That was invisible to adults who didn't want to get involved. After I hung up with Amy, I sat in my car in the school parking lot for a full 10 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to march straight over to Lincoln Middle and have a conversation with Tyler, Marcus, and Austin that they'd never forget. But the rational part of my brain knew that would only make things worse for Danny. If his big sister showed up to fight his battles, the bullying would probably escalate, and he'd be even more humiliated. So I made a decision that I thought was mature and responsible. I decided to talk to Danny first, get the full story, and then figure out the best way to handle the situation. Maybe we could go to the school administration together, or talk to our parents about getting involved. I wanted to handle this the right way. That was my second mistake. When Danny came home that afternoon, he looked like he'd been hit by a truck. His hair was even messier than usual, his clothes were wrinkled and stained, and he was carrying his backpack by one strap because the other one had been torn off. But the worst part was his face. My confident, brilliant little brother looked broken. "Danny," I started gently, "we need to talk." He looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted. "About what?" "About what happened at school today." "In the cafeteria." I watched his face crumple, and for a moment, I thought he was going to cry. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and tried to put on a brave face. Nothing happened. Just typical middle school stuff. "Danny, please don't lie to me. I know about Tyler Brooks and his friends. I know they destroyed your homework and humiliated you in front of everyone." The facade cracked, and my little brother suddenly looked every bit as young and vulnerable as he was. "How do you know about that?" "Someone saw it happen and thought I should know." "Danny, how long has this been going on?" He sat down heavily on our living room couch, dropping his damaged backpack on the floor. "About a month," he admitted. Quietly, it started small. They'd just make comments about my clothes or my glasses, call me names in the hallway. Then it got worse. Worse how? Danny took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. They started taking my homework, tearing it up, throwing it away. They'd knock my books out of my hands in the hallway and laugh when I had to pick everything up. Last week, Tyler shoved me into a locker so hard I had bruises on my back for 3 days. My hands clenched into fists without me realizing it. "Danny, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell Mom and Dad?" "Because what's the point?" he said, his voice cracking with frustration. "What are you going to do? Beat them up? What are Mom and Dad going to do? Call the school? You think that's going to make it better? It'll just make me look like even more of a weakling who needs his family to fight his battles." I sat down next to him and put my arm around his shoulders. "You're not a weakling, Danny. You're one of the strongest people I know. But you don't have to handle this alone." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "This is my problem, and I have to figure out how to deal with it. If I don't, it's just going to follow me to high school, then college, then everywhere else. I can't have my big sister protecting me for the rest of my life." I wanted to argue with him, but I could see his point. Danny was right that learning to stand up for himself was important. But he was also 13 years old and about as physically intimidating as a wet paper towel. Tyler Brooks was probably 6 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier than Danny, and that was before factoring in his 2 friends. "Okay," I said finally. "But if this gets any worse, you have to promise me you'll let me help. There's a difference between standing up for yourself and getting seriously hurt." Danny nodded and leaned against me. "I promise. And Jess? Thanks for not just charging over there and embarrassing me." I hugged him tighter, thinking that I was being such a good big sister, so mature and understanding. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, I'd be doing exactly what I'd promised not to do, and that it would be the best decision I'd ever made. The next morning started normally enough. Danny seemed a little more like himself at breakfast, even managing to eat most of his cereal. He'd stayed up late the night before redoing all the homework that Tyler and his crew had destroyed, and I could see the determination in his eyes as he carefully placed each assignment in a folder inside his backpack. "I'm going to keep my bag with me all day," he announced. "They can't mess with my homework if I don't let it out of my sight." I nodded encouragingly, but something about his plan worried me. It sounded like the kind of strategy that would work great right up until it didn't, and then things would get much worse very quickly. Just remember what we talked about, I said. If things escalate, you come find me immediately. Lincoln. Middle and Lincoln High are on opposite sides of town, Jess. I can't exactly run over there if something happens. He was right, of course. Our schools were about 20 minutes apart by car, which might as well have been on different planets, as far as getting help quickly was concerned. But I'd run out of reasonable alternatives, so I just hugged him goodbye and watched him walk to the bus stop with his backpack clutched protectively against his chest. I should have followed my instincts and called in sick that day. I should have driven over to Lincoln Middle and parked outside, keeping an eye on things from a distance. Hell, I should have done a lot of things differently. But I didn't, because I was trying to be respectful of Danny's wishes and handle the situation maturely. Instead, I went to school and tried to focus on my classes. I had a calculus test that morning that I'd been studying for all week, followed by a PE history and then martial arts practice after school. It should have been a normal day. It wasn't. At 1:47 p.m., right in the middle of my history class discussion about the causes of World War I, not buzzed rang. I had it set to silent for school, but somehow this call came through. Anyway, when I looked at the screen, I saw it was Danny calling from the school office. I raised my hand and asked to step outside, ignoring Mr. Peterson's annoyed expression. Danny never called during school hours unless it was an emergency. Danny, what's wrong? Jess, his voice was shaky and small. I'm in the nurse's office. Can you come pick me up? My heart stopped. Are you hurt? What happened? They took it too far this time. Please, can you just come get me? I'll explain everything when you get here. I was already grabbing my keys from my locker. I'm on my way. Don't go anywhere, okay? Stay in the nurse's office until I get there. The drive from Lincoln High to Lincoln Middle normally took about 20 minutes. I made it in 12, probably breaking several traffic laws in the process. I kept trying to call Danny back, but it went straight to voicemail every time. By the time I pulled into the middle school parking lot, my imagination had conjured up every worst-case scenario possible. The school secretary, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely looked up when I walked into the main office. I'm here to pick up Danny Chun, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Are you his parent or guardian? I'm his sister. He called me from the nurse's office. She picked up the phone and made a brief call, then nodded toward a hallway. Room 108, down the hall and to your left. I found Danny sitting on a cot in the nurse's office, and the sight of him made my blood boil. His glasses were held together with tape. There was a dark bruise forming on his left cheek, and his clothes were soaked and stained with what looked like chocolate milk and ketchup. His backpack sat open on the floor beside him, and I could see papers scattered everywhere, most of them torn or covered in food. But the worst part was the look in his eyes. My brilliant, determined little brother looked completely defeated. "Oh, Danny," I breathed, rushing over to him. The nurse, a kind-looking woman in her 30s, stood up from her desk. "You must be Jessica. I'm Mrs. Patterson. Danny's had a rough day." "What happened?" I asked, gently touching the bruise. On his cheek, Mrs. Patterson glanced at Danny, who nodded slightly. "From what I understand, there was an incident in the cafeteria during lunch. 3 boys cornered Danny and destroyed his homework assignments. When he tried to protect his backpack, things got physical. Physical how? One of them shoved him pretty hard. He hit his face on the edge of a table, which is where the bruise came from. His glasses got broken in the scuffle. I could feel my hands starting to shake with rage. And where are these 3 boys now? They've been suspended for the rest of the week," Mrs. Patterson said. "The principal is handling the disciplinary action." Danny finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter, Jess. They'll just come back madder than before." I knelt down in front of him and took his hands in mine. "Tell me exactly what happened. Everything." Danny's eyes filled with tears, but he took a deep breath and started talking. I was eating lunch by myself in the corner of the cafeteria, just trying to stay out of everyone's way. I had my backpack right next to me because I didn't want to leave it anywhere they could get to it. Tyler, Marcus, and Austin came over and started their usual stuff, calling me names, saying I thought I was better than everyone because I'm smart. He paused to wipe his nose with a tissue Mrs. Patterson handed him. I ignored them like always, but then Tyler grabbed my backpack and dumped everything out on the floor. All my homework, my textbooks, everything. When I tried to pick it up, Austin stepped on my math assignment and ground it into the floor with his shoe. My vision was starting to turn red around the edges, but I forced myself to stay calm. What happened next? I asked them to please stop, that I'd worked really hard on those assignments. Marcus thought that was hilarious. He picked up my English essay, the one I'd spent 2 weeks writing about To Kill a Mockingbird, and ripped it in half right in front of me. Danny's voice cracked, and I could see how much that had hurt him. Writing was one of his favorite things, and he'd been so proud of that essay. Then Tyler said he was tired of me acting like I was too good for them, and that maybe if I got roughed up a little, I'd learn some humility. When I tried to gather up what was left of my homework, he shoved me backwards. I lost my balance and hit my face on the edge of the table behind me. I was beyond furious now, but I kept my voice gentle for Danny's sake. "Did anyone help you? Did any teachers see what happened?" Danny shook his head miserably. Mrs. Kim was on lunch duty, but she was dealing with some other problem on the other side of the cafeteria. By the time she noticed what was happening, Tyler and his friends were already walking away like nothing had happened. A few kids helped me pick up my stuff, but most of it was ruined. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat. "I've already spoken with Principal Johnson about the incident. The 3 boys will face consequences, and there will be a meeting with their parents." "What kind of consequences?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be inadequate. 3-day suspension and mandatory counseling sessions. 3 days. 3 days for weeks of systematic bullying that had culminated in physically assaulting my little brother and destroying his schoolwork. I bit back the response I wanted to give and focused on Danny instead. "Are you okay to go home? Do you need to see a doctor about your face?" Danny shook his head. "It's just a bruise. I'll be fine." But I could see that he wasn't fine, not even close. This wasn't just about the physical assault or the destroyed homework. This was about the systematic destruction of his confidence, his sense of safety, his ability to focus on the things he loved. Tyler Brooks and his friends hadn't just hurt my brother's face, they'd tried to break his spirit. As we gathered up what was left of Danny's belongings and walked out to my car, I made a decision. I wasn't going to handle this maturely or responsibly. I wasn't going to trust the school administration to protect my brother, or hope that a 3-day suspension would somehow transform 3 bullies into decent human beings. I was going to handle this my way. But first, I needed to take care of Danny. I drove him home and helped him get cleaned up, making him a grilled cheese sandwich and hot chocolate while he changed into clean clothes. We spent the rest of the afternoon on the couch, watching his favorite Marvel movies and not talking about what had happened. That evening, when Mom came home from her shift at the hospital, we told her everything. She was furious, of course, and wanted to march over to the school immediately to demand action. But Danny begged her not to make a big scene, and eventually, she agreed to wait until the next day to call Principal Johnson. Dad called from Seattle that night, and when he heard what had happened, he was ready to fly home immediately and handle the situation himself. It took both Mom and me to convince him that wasn't necessary, though I could hear the frustration in his voice when he finally agreed to stay put. After our parents went to bed, Danny and I sat in the kitchen, supposedly doing homework, but really just talking. I don't want to go back, Danny said quietly. To school? He nodded. I know I have to, but I don't want to. Every time I walk into that building, I feel like I'm walking into enemy territory. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You shouldn't have to feel that way. School should be a place where you can learn and grow, not somewhere you have to constantly watch your back. But that's not reality, is it? There are always going to be people like Tyler and Marcus and Austin. People who think it's fun to hurt others just because they can. Danny was right, of course. There would always be bullies, predators, people who got their kicks from making others miserable. But that didn't mean he had to accept being there. Victim, you know what, Danny? You're absolutely right. There will always be people like that. But there are also people like us people who won't stand by and let innocent people get hurt. What do you mean? I looked at my little brother with his taped-up glasses and his bruised face, and I made him a promise. I mean that Tyler Brooks and his friends are about to learn that you're not as alone as they think you are. And sometimes bullies need to be reminded that their actions have consequences. Danny looked worried. Jess, you promised you wouldn't embarrass me by fighting my battles. I'm not going to fight your battles, I said, and I meant it. But I am going to make sure you have the tools to fight them yourself. And if those three idiots want to escalate things to physical violence, well, they picked the wrong family to mess with. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, planning. I wasn't going to charge over to Lincoln Middle and beat up 3 13-year-old boys. That would be inappropriate and probably illegal. But I was going to make sure that the next time they decided to corner my brother, they'd get a very unpleasant surprise. I had no idea that I wouldn't have to wait long for that opportunity. The next morning, I woke up with a plan that would either solve Danny's problem permanently or get me expelled from high school. Honestly, I was fine with either outcome at that point. I'd spent most of the night thinking about what Master Kim had taught me about conflict resolution. The best fight is the one that never happens, he'd always say. But when a fight becomes inevitable, end it quickly and decisively. Tyler Brooks and his crew had made this fight inevitable the moment they put their hands on my little brother. Danny was still asleep when I got up, so I left him a note saying I had early morning practice and would see him after school. That wasn't technically a lie. I did have practice, just not the kind he was thinking about. I grabbed my gear bag, threw on my Lincoln High School hoodie, and headed out. My first stop was Master Kim's dojo. Even though it was barely 7 in the morning, I knew he'd be there. Master Kim was one of those people who seemed to live at his martial arts school, always arriving before dawn to meditate and practice forms in the quiet hours before students arrived. I found him exactly where I expected, in the center of the main training mat, moving through a slow, precise kata that looked like a deadly dance. At 62, Master Kim was still one of the most formidable martial artists I'd ever met. He'd immigrated from South Korea 30 years ago and opened his school with nothing but determination and skills that had been honed in some very dangerous places. "Jessica-san," he said without stopping his form or even looking in my direction. "You are troubled." Master Kim had this unsettling ability to read people's emotional states just from their body language and energy. It was one of the many reasons I respected him so much. "Yes, sir," I said, bowing formally as I approached the edge of the mat. He completed his kata with a final, explosive movement that would have sent an imaginary opponent flying across the room, then turned to face me. "Tell me." I explained the situation with Danny, leaving out none of the details. Master Kim listened without interruption, his dark eyes growing harder with each part of the story. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "These boys have crossed a line," he said finally. "There is a difference between childhood conflict and predatory behavior. What you describe as predatory behavior. That's what I thought. But Danny doesn't want me to get involved. He thinks he needs to handle this himself." Master Kim nodded thoughtfully. "Your brother is not wrong. A man must learn to stand up for himself. But these are not men, they are boys playing at being predators. And your brother is not equipped to deal with predators. So what do? You teach them the difference between picking on someone their own size and picking on someone with protection. But you must be very careful, Jessica-san. You are not a child anymore. If you use your skills against these boys, there will be consequences. I know. But I can't just stand by and watch them destroy my brother. Master Kim walked over to the weapons rack and selected a pair of practice swords. Show me your current skill level. I need to know exactly what you are capable of before I can advise you. For the next hour, Master Kim put me through the most intense training session I'd had in months. We worked through empty hand techniques, grappling, weapons forms, and sparring scenarios. By the time we finished, I was dripping with sweat, and my muscles were screaming, but I felt more centered and focused than I had since this whole situation started. You are ready, Master Kim said simply. But remember, your goal is not to hurt these boys. Your goal is to demonstrate that your brother is not helpless and that there are consequences for predatory behavior. Show them overwhelming force, but use it with restraint. How do I do that without actually fighting them? Master Kim smiled, and there was something almost predatory in his expression. You will know when the moment comes. Trust your training and your instincts. And, Jessica-san? Yes, sir? Your brother is fortunate to have you. But after today, he must learn to stand on his own. You cannot always be his protector. I bowed deeply and left the dojo, Master Kim's words echoing in my mind. He was right, of course. Even if I solved the immediate problem with Tyler and his friends, Danny would eventually face other bullies, other challenges. But maybe if I handled this situation correctly, I could give him the confidence and tools he needed to handle future problems himself. My next stop was Lincoln Middle School. I had 2 hours before my own classes started, which gave me plenty of time to do some reconnaissance. I parked across the street from the school and watched as students began arriving for the day. It didn't take long to spot Tyler Brooks getting off a bus with his 2 sidekicks in tow. Tyler was exactly what I'd expected tall for his age, with the kind of swagger that screamed, "I've never faced real consequences for my actions." He had flaming red hair and was wearing a Letterman jacket that looked too big for him, probably borrowed from an older brother or cousin. Marcus Webb was shorter but built like a brick wall, with small, mean eyes and hands that looked like they were designed for hurting people. Austin Phillips was the most disturbing of the 3, thin and wiry, with bleached blonde hair and a leather jacket that he clearly thought made him look cool. He had the kind of smile that suggested he enjoyed other people's pain a little too much. I watched them swagger across the school courtyard, noting how other students moved out of their way. These weren't just random bullies. They were the apex predators of Lincoln Middle School, and everyone knew it. They'd probably been getting away with behavior like this for years, growing bolder and more vicious with each victory. As I watched Tyler shove a smaller kid out of his way just for fun, I felt my resolve harden. These boys needed to learn that actions have consequences, and apparently, no adult in their lives had bothered to teach them that lesson yet. I drove to Lincoln High and attended my morning classes, but I'll admit I wasn't paying much attention to calculus or American literature. My mind was focused on the plan that was forming, step by step, detail by detail. I'd have one chance to get this right, and I wasn't going to waste it. During lunch, I called Amy Martinez and asked if her brother Carlos could do me a favor. What kind of favor? Amy asked suspiciously. I need him to get a message to Danny. Tell him that Tyler and his friends are planning something big today after school in the parking lot, and that he should stay in the building until I can pick him up. Jessica, what are you planning? Nothing that will get Carlos in trouble. I just need Danny to stay safe while I handle some business. Amy was quiet for a moment. My brother said what happened to Danny yesterday was really brutal. Those 3 boys are psychopaths. Yeah, well, they picked the wrong family to mess with. After school, I changed into clothes that would give me maximum mobility: black jeans, sneakers, and a fitted black t-shirt. I put my hair up in a tight bun and grabbed my gear bag. I wasn't planning to use any weapons, but I wanted to have options available if things went sideways. The drive to Lincoln Middle felt like it took forever, even though it was only 20 minutes. I kept running through scenarios in my head, trying to anticipate every possible way the confrontation might unfold. The key was to end things quickly and decisively without causing any permanent damage to 3 13-year-old boys, no matter how much they deserved it. I arrived at Lincoln Middle just as the final bell was ringing. Students began pouring out of the building, heading for buses, cars, and the walking paths that led to the surrounding neighborhoods. I positioned myself near the main exit where I'd have a clear view of everything happening in the courtyard and parking lot. It didn't take long to spot Tyler, Marcus, and Austin. They were hanging around the bike racks, clearly waiting for something or someone. A few minutes later, I saw Danny emerge from the building with his taped-up glasses and his carefully protected backpack. He looked around nervously, probably hoping to spot me or at least make it to the bus without incident. He never made it that far. Tyler intercepted him about halfway across the courtyard, with Marcus and Austin flanking him on either side. From where I was standing, I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language was clear enough. This wasn't a random encounter. They'd been waiting for Danny specifically. I watched as Tyler grabbed Danny's backpack and yanked it away from him. Danny reached for it, but Marcus shoved him backwards hard enough to send him stumbling. Austin was laughing, clearly enjoying the show. Around them, other students either hurried past with their heads down or stopped to watch, but none of them made any move to help. That's when I saw Tyler unzip Danny's backpack and dump the contents all over the ground. Homework assignments, textbooks, pencils, and pens scattered across the concrete. Danny dropped to his knees and started frantically trying to gather his things, but every time he reached for something, one of the 3 boys would kick it away or step on it. I'd seen enough. I grabbed my gear bag and started walking across the courtyard, my footsteps silent despite the concrete surface. Years of martial arts training had taught me how to move without making noise, how to approach a target without being detected until it was too late for them to react. "Please," I heard Danny say as I got closer. "Just leave my stuff alone. I didn't do anything to you." "You exist," Tyler sneered. "That's enough. Maybe if you cry a little, we'll consider giving you back your precious homework," Austin added, his voice high and mocking. "Or maybe we should see how well you swim," Marcus suggested, pulling out a water bottle. "I bet your notebooks would look great soaked." That's when I stepped into their circle. "Excuse me," I said politely, my voice carrying just enough authority to make all 4 boys look up. "I think you have something that belongs to my brother." Tyler straightened up, trying to look intimidating. Up close, he was even more of a wannabe tough guy than I'd thought. The Letterman jacket was definitely too big for him, and his freckled face made him look younger than his 13 years. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "I'm Jessica Chun," I said calmly, "Danny's older sister. And you 3 are Tyler Brooks, Marcus Webb, and Austin Phillips. We need to have a conversation." I saw recognition flash in their eyes. Apparently, my reputation had preceded me, at least a little bit. Lincoln wasn't a huge town, and the martial arts community was pretty tight-knit. It was possible they'd heard of Master Kim's school or seen me compete in local tournaments. "This doesn't concern you," Tyler said, but there was less confidence in his voice than before. "This is between us and your freak brother. Actually, it concerns me very much," I replied, stepping closer. "See, when someone puts their hands on my family, it becomes my business." Danny was still on his knees, trying to gather his scattered belongings. I could see the humiliation and fear in his eyes, but also something else: relief. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't facing this alone. "You need to leave," Marcus said, puffing out his chest like he was trying to make himself look bigger. "This is our school, and we don't want you here. I'm not going anywhere until you three apologize to my brother and pick up every single piece of his homework that you scattered around." Austin giggled, that same disturbing sound that Danny had described. "Or what? You're going to fight? US? 3 against 1. "Oh, I'm not going to fight you," I said, and my voice was so calm it seemed to make them nervous. "Fighting implies that you'd have a chance." The courtyard around us was getting quieter as more students stopped to watch. I could see phones coming out, which meant this was probably going to end up on social media within the hour. That was fine with me. In fact, it was part of the plan. Tyler looked around at the growing crowd and seemed to regain some of his confidence. "You're crazy if you think you can take all 3 of us. We're not afraid of some girl." "You should be," I said simply. That's when Marcus made his first mistake. He lunged forward, probably planning to grab me or shove me like he'd done to Danny. What he didn't expect was for me to be ready for it. I sidestepped his clumsy attack and used his own momentum against him, grabbing his extended arm and executing a perfect hip throw that sent him flying through the air. He landed hard on his back about 6 feet away, the impact driving all the air from his lungs with a loud whoosh. The courtyard went dead silent. Austin's mouth dropped open, and Tyler took a step backward. Marcus was on the ground, gasping like a fish out of water and staring at me with a mixture of shock and terror. "That was a basic judo throw," I explained conversationally. "I learned it when I was about 8 years old. Would you like to see what I learned when I was 16? Tyler's face had gone pale under his freckles. "You can't just attack people on school property. We'll call the police." "Please do," I said. I'd love to explain to them how 3 boys have been systematically bullying and physically assaulting my 13-year-old brother for weeks. I'm sure they'd be very interested in that story. Austin was still staring at Marcus, who was finally managing to sit up and breathe again. "How did you do that? He's twice your size." "Size doesn't matter when you know what you're doing." Which brings me to my main point. I looked directly at Tyler, letting him see the steel in my eyes. "You 3 seem to think that picking on smaller, weaker people makes you tough. It doesn't. It makes you cowards." "We're not cowards," Tyler protested, but his voice cracked. "Really? Then why don't you pick on someone your own size? Why don't you go find some 8th graders to mess with instead of targeting a kid who's obviously no physical threat to anyone?" "Because they'd fight back," Austin said without thinking, then immediately looked like he regretted the admission. "Exactly," I said. "You only pick on people who can't or won't fight back. That's the definition of cowardice." Marcus had finally gotten back to his feet, though he was still breathing hard. "You got lucky," he said. "That won't happen again. You want to test that theory?" I asked, shifting slightly into a combat stance. The 3 boys looked at each other, clearly trying to decide if they could take me together. I could see the wheels turning in their heads. They outnumbered me. They were on their home turf, and backing down in front of all these witnesses would be humiliating. Tyler made the decision for all of them. "Get her," he ordered. What happened next was probably the most one-sided fight in Lincoln Middle School history. Marcus came at me first, swinging his fists wildly like he was trying to box. I caught his right hand in mid-swing, used his own momentum to spin him around, and put him in a restraint hold that left him completely immobilized but unharmed. Austin tried to circle around behind me while I was dealing with Marcus, but I'd been trained to fight multiple opponents. Without letting go of Marcus, I swept Austin's legs out from under him with a backward kick that sent him sprawling across the concrete. Tyler hesitated for just a moment, probably realizing that this wasn't going the way he'd planned. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. I released Marcus with a gentle push that sent him stumbling away, then focused my full attention on the ringleader. Tyler was bigger than the other two and probably thought that made him more dangerous. What he didn't realize was that bigger opponents were actually easier to deal with if you knew what you were doing. Their size made them slower, and their confidence made them sloppy. He charged at me like a linebacker, which was exactly what I'd been hoping for. At the last second, I dropped low and swept his legs, using his own weight and momentum to send him crashing to the ground. Before he could recover, I had him in a submission hold that left him completely helpless. "Here's how this is going to work," I said calmly, even though I had Tyler's arm twisted at an angle that would be very painful if he tried to move. "You three are going to apologize to my brother. You're going to pick up every single piece of his homework. And you're never going to bother him again." "Let me go," Tyler gasped. "I will, as soon as you agree to my terms." Austin was trying to get back to his feet, but his legs were shaky. Marcus was holding his shoulder where I'd grabbed him, looking like he was trying to figure out what had just happened. "This is insane," Marcus said. "You can't just come to our school and beat us up." "I haven't beaten anyone up," I pointed out. "I've simply demonstrated that actions have consequences. Your actions, weeks of bullying, destroying property, and physically assaulting my brother, have led to this consequence." Tyler tried to struggle against the hold I had him in, but that just made it more painful. Okay, I'm sorry." "We're sorry." "Sorry for what specifically?" "Sorry for messing with your brother. Not good enough. I want you to look at Danny and tell him exactly what you're sorry for." Tyler's face was red with pain and humiliation, but he looked over at Danny, who was still sitting on the ground surrounded by his scattered belongings. "I'm sorry for taking your lunch money and destroying your homework and pushing you around," Tyler said quickly. And for calling you names and making fun of you." I looked at Marcus and Austin. "Your turn," both boys quickly mumbled. Similar apologies, clearly more concerned with not ending up in the same position as Tyler than with sounding sincere. Now I said, "You're going to pick up every single piece of Danny's homework and put it back in his backpack, carefully." I released Tyler and stepped back, but stayed in a ready position in case any of them decided to try something stupid. They didn't. All three boys scrambled around the courtyard, gathering up papers, pens, textbooks, and everything else they'd scattered. A few of the papers were torn or dirty, but most of Danny's work was salvageable. While they were cleaning up their mess, I helped Danny to his feet and checked to make sure he wasn't hurt. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly. Danny nodded, but I could see tears in his eyes. "I can't believe you actually came. I told you I wouldn't let them hurt you. But what about what I said about fighting my own battles?" I looked down at my little brother with his taped-up glasses and his bruised face, and felt a surge of protective love that was almost overwhelming. "Danny, there's a difference between fighting your own battles and facing impossible odds alone. These three have been ganging up on you for weeks. That's not a fair fight, that's an execution." Tyler finished putting the last of Danny's papers in his backpack and stood up, his face still red with embarrassment. Around us, the crowd of students was bigger than ever, and I could see several teachers starting to push through the crowd. "We're done here," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Tyler, Marcus, and Austin have apologized to my brother and cleaned up the mess they made. As long as they leave Danny alone from now on, we won't have any more problems." "And if we don't?" Austin asked, his voice still defiant despite everything that had just happened. I smiled, and there was nothing friendly about it. "Then you'll discover that what just happened was me being gentle," Principal Johnson finally neighed. It threw the crowd, looking harried and more than a little concerned. "What's going on here? Miss Chun, what are you doing on campus?" "I came to pick up my brother," I said innocently. "There was a small misunderstanding with some of his classmates, but I think we've worked everything out." The principal looked Around at the three boys, noting their disheveled appearance and the way they were avoiding eye contact with everyone. Is that true? Has this situation been resolved? Tyler, Marcus, and Austin all nodded quickly. None of them wanted to explain to the principal that they'd just been humiliated by a 17-year-old girl in front of half the school. Good. Principal Johnson said, though he still looked suspicious. Miss Chun, I'll need you to leave campus immediately. And boys, I want to see all three of you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. As the crowd began to disperse and the three boys slunk away, I put my arm around Danny's shoulders and walked him toward the parking lot where my car was waiting. Is it over? Danny asked quietly. With those three? Yeah, it's over. There. Not going to bother you anymore. How can you be sure? I thought about the looks on their faces when they realized they were completely outmatched, the way their voices had shaken when they apologized, the embarrassment of being defeated in front of their peers. Because bullies are fundamentally cowards, Danny. They only pick on people they think can't fight back. Now they know that bothering you means dealing with me, and they want no part of that. We reached my car, and I helped Danny load his backpack into the back seat. As we drove home, he was quiet for a long time, staring out the window and processing everything that had happened. Jess? He said finally. Yeah? Thank you. I know I said I wanted to handle it myself, but I couldn't. They were too much for me. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it, Danny. That's what family's for. But what happens next time? What happens when I face bullies in high school, or college, or at work? You can't always be there to protect me. I'd been thinking about the same thing, and I had an answer ready. You're right, I can't always be there. But I can teach you how to protect yourself. Master Kim's been wanting to expand his youth program anyway. What would you think about taking martial arts classes? Danny's eyes lit up behind his taped glasses. Really? You'd teach me to fight like that? I'd teach you to defend yourself. There's a difference. Martial arts isn't about learning to hurt people. It's about learning confidence, discipline, and how to protect yourself and others when necessary. I'd like that, Danny said firmly. I never want to feel helpless like that again. We spent the rest of the drive home talking about martial arts training, different styles and philosophies, and what Danny could expect if he decided to start classes. By the time we pulled into our driveway, he seemed like a different person, still quiet and thoughtful, but with a new sense of purpose and determination. That evening, when Mom came home from work, we told her about the day's events. She was simultaneously proud of me for protecting Danny and concerned about the potential consequences of my actions. What if those boys' parents decide to press charges? She asked. What if the school decides to ban you from campus? Then we'll deal with it, I said. But I'm not going to apologize for protecting my brother. Dad called from Seattle that night, and when he heard the whole story, he was quiet for a long time. You did the right thing, Jessica, he said. Finally, I'm proud of you for standing up for your brother. But your mother's right to be concerned about consequences. I know, Dad, but someone had to show those boys that their actions have consequences. The school wasn't doing it. Their parents weren't doing it, so I did it. Just promise me you'll be careful. The world doesn't always reward people for doing the right thing. I promised, though I wasn't sure it was a promise I could keep. If someone threatened my family again, I'd do whatever it took to protect them, consequences be damned. The next few days passed without incident. Danny went back to school with renewed confidence, and according to the reports I got from Amy's brother Carlos, Tyler, Marcus, and Austin were giving him a wide berth. Word had spread quickly through Lincoln Middle about what had happened in the courtyard, and the three former bullies found themselves on the receiving end of the kind of social humiliation they'd been dishing out for years. More importantly, other potential victims seemed to be standing up for themselves more. Carlos reported that the general atmosphere at Lincoln Middle had improved dramatically, as if removing 3 apex predators had allowed the entire ecosystem to rebalance itself. On Friday of that week, I was in the parking lot after school when I saw a familiar figure approaching my car. Tyler Brooks was walking toward me, alone this time, and he looked nervous but determined. "Can we talk?" he asked when he reached my car. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden aggression. What I saw instead was something I hadn't expected: genuine remorse. "What do you want to talk about?" Tyler looked around the parking lot, making sure we were alone. I wanted to apologize. For real this time, not just because you had me in some kind of kung fu death grip. It was a submission hold, not a death grip. And I'm not the one you owe an apology to. I already apologized to Danny yesterday, in private. I told him I was sorry for everything we did, and that it wouldn't happen again. I raised an eyebrow. And I meant it. What you did on Tuesday, it made me realize some things about myself that I didn't like. Tyler sat down on the curb next to my car, suddenly looking much younger than his 13 years. "I used to get picked on too," he said quietly. "In elementary school, there was this kid named Brian who made my life hell for 2 years. He was bigger than me, older, and he seemed to think it was funny to make me cry in front of everyone." "What happened?" My older brother found out. "He's in high school now, plays football, and he's kind of like you. He had a conversation with Brian that ended with Brian never bothering me again." Tyler picked up a small rock and threw it across the parking lot. "After that, I swore I'd never let anyone make me feel that helpless again. But somewhere along the way, I became the thing I used to hate." "What made you realize that?" "Watching your brother try to pick up his homework while we laughed at him. For just a second, I saw myself in him. I remembered what it felt like to be completely powerless while someone else decided whether you were going to have a good day or a bad day." Tyler looked up at me, and I could see tears in his eyes. "I became Brian. I became the person who made my life hell, and I didn't even realize it until you showed up and reminded me what real strength looks like." I sat down on the curb next to him, processing what he'd just told me. "So what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know. Marcus and Austin, they're not like me. They actually enjoyed hurting your brother. I think they're just naturally mean, but maybe I can find a way to be better. You can start by using your position to protect people instead of hurt them. You obviously have influence at your school. Use it for good instead of evil." Tyler nodded slowly. "My brother always said that being strong means protecting people who can't protect themselves. I forgot that for a while. It's not too late to remember." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching other students head home for the weekend. Finally, Tyler stood up and brushed off his jeans. "Your brother's lucky to have you," he said. "I hope someday I can be the kind of person who deserves that kind of loyalty." As Tyler walked away, I thought about what Master Kim had said about the difference between strength and cruelty. Maybe there was hope for Tyler Brooks after all. Marcus and Austin were probably lost causes and people really were just naturally mean, but Tyler seemed capable of growth and change. That weekend, I took Danny to Master Kim's dojo for his first martial arts lesson. Watching my little brother learn his first basic techniques, seeing the confidence start to build in his eyes, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I'd given him the tools he needed to protect himself, but more importantly, I'd given him the knowledge that he wasn't alone in the world. 3 months later, Danny tested for his first belt rank. He was still quiet and thoughtful, still more interested in books than sports, but he carried himself differently now. There was a strength in his posture that hadn't been there before. A quiet confidence that said he wouldn't be an easy target for anyone. Tyler Brooks kept his word. According to reports from Lincoln Middle, he'd become something of a protector for younger students, using his size and influence to stop bullying rather than perpetrate it. Marcus and Austin had found new targets, but without Tyler's leadership, they were far less effective and eventually moved on to picking on each other. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best way to handle a problem is with overwhelming force applied at exactly the right moment. The confrontation with Tyler and his friends had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it had solved a problem that could have plagued Danny for years. More importantly, I'd learned that being strong means knowing when to use that strength and when to hold back. I could have seriously hurt those 3 boys. My training had certainly given me the ability to do so. But showing restraint, demonstrating just enough power to solve the problem without causing lasting damage, had been far more effective than any display of violence could have been. The story of what happened in the Lincoln Middle School courtyard became something of a legend in our town. It got embellished over time. Of course, by the time it made its way through the high school rumor mill, I'd apparently defeated 6 armed ninjas with nothing but a paper clip and my devastating wit. But the core message remained the same. Bullies might pick on people they think are helpless, but they never know when those people might have family who are very much not helpless. Danny graduated from Lincoln Middle School with honors and went on to Lincoln High, where his quiet confidence and martial arts training served him well. He never had to use the physical skills I'd taught him, but knowing he had them gave him the kind of inner strength that made him an unlikely target for future bullies. As for me, I learned that being a big sister sometimes means making hard choices and accepting difficult consequences. The confrontation with Tyler's group had solved Danny's immediate problem, but it had also marked me as someone who was willing to use violence when necessary. That reputation followed me for the rest of high school and even into college. Some people saw me as a hero, the girl who'd stood up to bullies and protected her little brother. Others saw me as a troublemaker who'd brought violence to a middle school campus. I was okay with both perceptions, because at the end of the day, my little brother was safe, and that was all that mattered to me. The most important lesson I learned from the whole experience was that strength without compassion is just another form of bullying, but compassion without strength is often helpless in the face of genuine evil. The trick is finding the balance between the two, knowing when to show mercy and when to show force. Danny and I are both adults now, and we still talk about that day sometimes. He's a successful engineer, confident and capable, with a black belt of his own and a reputation for standing up to workplace bullies on behalf of his more timid colleagues. He learned the lessons I tried to teach him about protecting others and using strength responsibly. And sometimes, when we're feeling nostalgic, we'll drive past Lincoln Middle School and remember the day that 3 bullies learned the hard way that some quiet kids have very protective big sisters. Tyler Brooks, by the way, went on to become a social worker specializing in anti-bullying programs. He still sends Danny Christmas cards every year, with notes thanking him for helping him become a better person. Even Marcus and Austin eventually grew out of their bullying phase, though it took them considerably longer than Tyler. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the best way to stop a cycle of violence is with a single, decisive application of superior force. Not to destroy or humiliate, but to demonstrate that there are consequences for predatory behavior, and that some people won't stand idly by while the innocent are victimized. Most importantly, it taught me that being strong means protecting those who can't protect themselves, and that sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when not to use the full extent of your power. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.